What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the College Bowl Preview Edition as we are joined by Nebraska insider Avarie Howard with Hurrdat Sports and Hell Varsity to preview the Pinstripe Bowl featuring Boston College Eagles and her Nebraska Cornhuskers. How are you doing, Avarie?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Doing well. Can't
Good.
wait to talk about the chaos of bowl season, the opt-outs, and everything else. So I'm glad you could join us here. Quentin, I'll let you start off with the questions for Miss Howard.
Yeah, Nebraska, cold weather state in the winter, somehow can't find a beach. It's funny, I stayed at a hotel over the holidays several years ago, and Iowa was there, and it was like high of 73, and it was you would have thought we were sitting on the Caribbean. They were so excited.
Yeah.
But here we are. We're playing in New York, Pinstripe Bowl. What is your feel? And I'll start with this before we get in the bowl game. The way the team kind of played, it seemed like defensively they could have competed with anybody in the country. Offensively, they looked great at times, and then it looked like they didn't get off the bus at times. Now we're heading into what I feel like is a pivotal area where you get those extra practices, you get that extra experience. Like, what's your take maybe as how the team played throughout the season, and then what's your opinion on how these extra practices and things have gone?
Yeah. I mean, for both programs, they came out of the gates pretty hot. This Nebraska was 5-1. And I think the fan base, I mean, I'm pretty sure I overheard it leaving the game. They're like, we're going to the playoff this year. That was the confidence level of everyone watching this team so early on. And they even were kind of battle tested a little bit in that second game of the season against Colorado. It wasn't just, a random team. That was a big one. So that tested that team early. And I think the fan base felt pretty confident. And rightfully so. Watching that game, the Nebraska team, despite what the score ended up being, it felt like Nebraska had that from the minute that game started, which was refreshing to watch for the fans. And I think it was a wake-up call for the team too. Like, hey, we know we're a good team, but we just proved that this is what we can be this year. So going to a 5-1 record was obviously great. And then like both teams, they kind of hit that mid-season skid. And I think the Ohio State game, if it would have come before the Indiana game, I think it makes that Indiana game potentially different just because the result of Indiana, I mean, I think that was the game that everyone was like, oh, Indiana, we know they're good, but that was like, okay, they're legit. I think even I was there and I was like, I don't really know what to expect from this game. I think Nebraska could, test them. And then sitting there, I was like, I don't really know what's going on here. And then they go to an Ohio State game the next week and it's like, oh, okay, that's a little bit more like it. Sorry, we have dogs here.
You're good.
You're fine.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that point really, really, really tested this team. After Indiana, it was like, okay, maybe we have a lot more question marks than what the beginning of our schedule was showing us. Some of the reactions I think were surprising for some. A lot of things that this team and this fan base thought they had gotten over maybe crept back up in that Indiana game. So the back half of the season was kind of deja vu from last year a little bit. Like this team's chasing six so hard that it maybe took over if they could really just play football. But then for them to do what they did against Wisconsin, it being in that stadium, you could feel the weight just lifted away despite what happened at Iowa the following week. So I'm excited to see these two teams go up against each other. I think they had kind of similar seasons. They had a hot start. They had a lot of hurdles. So I think it'll be a really evenly matched game, and it'll be fun to face a team in another conference.
Avarie, with Matt Rule, it seems like there's a trend of his year to click is year 3. He started 2-10 at Temple, then 6-6, then 10-4. Baylor, same kind of story, 1-11, 7-6, 11-3 in that year 3. You're sitting at 6-6. How much do you think a win in this bowl game is going to help with that trajectory to get off to another hot start and say, hey, we can win 10 or 11 games this year and make the playoff?
Yeah, I think it'll be massive because if you've heard the messaging of these press conferences, not only from the players, but even not even from the coaches, from the players saying it themselves without even being asked, they're like, we know this is, game number 1 of 2025. And they've kind of split these practices up into an interesting situation. So they've allowed a lot of the veterans and the seniors to not be in all of these practices. They've been able to kind of step off to the side and do some indie work a little bit, but they're also literally coaching these younger guys. It's been, a time that they haven't had. And for some of these players, they've been here for 6 years and they've never been in these kind of practices before. And so, I mean, Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmacher, they are literally sitting at practice telling these linemen, hey, this is what it's going to be like this year. If you're going to be in this position, this and that, like they're having the ability to, yes, get ready for a bowl game, but also start to coach these players for next year and say, hey, this is your role. Like, I'm not playing today in practice. This is you. This is what it's going to look like. So I think that's been kind of special for them to have that opportunity to literally be a player-led team, which I think has been part of the why Nebraska saw some success this season. It was a very player-oriented team. And so for them to carry that on already into next year by allowing these players to coach, I think that's pretty special. But like you said, we've heard it a lot, I think, from Coach Rule even. He's like, year 3 is, known for being my year, and we're going to make sure it's like that. And I think we're seeing some early signs of it in just the way that they've recruited, and even the guys they've gotten and the transfer portal, they've been obviously very aggressive. And so there was high hopes for year 1. There was high hopes for year 2. And so I think the pressure, Coach Rule shares that he's been here for 2 years and he feels it. He knows what it's like to already take on the pressure of being a coach and trying to chase that success at Nebraska. And I think this year will be the first year he really, really has his guys and his team. And I don't want that to go the wrong way, though. He really embraced the guys that were here from the previous coaching staff, and he really loved them as if they were his own recruits. So I'm really excited to see what it's going to look like when him and his newer coaching staff bring in exactly who they want to be in this program.
Yeah, one of the biggest things he talked about last offseason was a good quarterback. It cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
They got their guy, Dylan Raiola, or at least outsiders looking in, is Raiola the guy. 12 touchdowns, 10 interceptions on this year. He was a freshman, so I figured he would take his lumps. But how do you think of Raiola moving forward? Do you think this is the quarterback for the Huskers in the future?
Yeah, I think you can see what he does on the field. And I mean, if you're not in the Nebraska media, you're not going to track his every move. But what he does off the field, the way he's galvanized this team, the way he's come in as a freshman. And, I think it's cool. Some of the older players said, he very well could have come in here, know who he is, try and point fingers and say, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to be this way. But it wasn't. He let the older guys be the leaders. And then he found his way and figured out where he could be a leader and where he could lead this offense. And once it was his, then he found his footing. But I think you can look at the numbers, you can, the interceptions, just maybe the inconsistencies. And, they did make that offensive coordinator position change. And I think we saw his confidence grow. And, he was very vocal about it. He said it's not necessarily Marcus Satterfield's fault. Like, we got to go out and do it. But once that change happened, I think we also heard them be pretty vocal about why they were able to have some more success later in the season. The playbook got a little bit more simplified. Even Dana Holgerson was like, I don't even know if I can call some of these things because they're so extensive. And so that's why I think this month of practice will be really important for them too, because he's even said in these press conferences, I finally know how to call these plays. Like, I can write them out now. I wasn't able to do that when I first came in. So I think we saw his confidence grow. They lost at USC and Dylan was like, we're fine. Like, I can see where this is going. So, Coach says all the time that, we see what he does on the field, but very few of us get to see what he does in the classroom. And Dana said he's been around a ton of quarterbacks, and his IQ, the way he understands film. He's like, I'm sure his dad and his uncle have been put him in film since he was 6, the way that he breaks things down. So I think that's the true sign too, is that he can read the game really well when, in the classroom, and he understands it. So I think that's a telling sign. That's things that we don't get to sit and watch. So I think that's exciting to hear. And I think, like you already said, he did take his bumps and bruises as a freshman. And there's a lot of games where Rule said there was no point in me bringing him out because he's got to learn how to get through this now. So I think we'll see him grow and get stronger from that. And I think also he'll have a lot more weapons around him as well.
Avery, so you talk about the seniors and the upperclassmen, kind of almost like that coaching role for the next guy up that is going to take those spots. Some of those guys, so many on the team, haven't been to a bowl game. How do you kind of manage that from maybe Matt Rule's perspective in Holgerson? So not only are you teaching, your senior guys what it's like to prepare for a bowl game, they're also trying to teach the position to the guy below them. Like, now you're traveling cross country. How has it been for them to be able to kind of manage this process, because it is so new for a lot of the players, and trying to take your expertise from maybe your past experiences into this, so you're prepared against Boston College, who, like you said, in the same respects, very roller coaster season. They need to win just as bad as Nebraska. Bill O'Brien wants momentum as well. So I think both teams are eager. How do you manage that kind of with these practices?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting you say that because Ramir Johnson, he's a sixth-year running back on this team. He's from New York. So this will be kind of cool for him. But he was the one that opened up about that. And they asked him, you know, the meaning of going to this bowl game. You've never been in one like this. And you got players leaving. You got players deciding what to do in this time period. They're like, how do you manage that? You know, this is a big game for you. Yet you've got some guys and teammates leaving and stuff. And he goes, honestly, I welcome any questions because I've been through just about everything here besides the bowl game. So if there's any way I can give some perspective or just some advice, I would love to give it. And so I think that's kind of what it seems like the shared mentality and mindset is for most of these seniors and the veterans who have been here. I think there's an extreme excitement. There's an extreme excitement just to go finish their careers this way because there's so many of these players that could have jumped ship a long time ago. Is that too loud?
No, it happens all the time.
Okay.
For us.
Yeah. They could have jumped ship and had other opportunities, but they were committed to Nebraska. And for them to get this bowl game win, I think that's just kind of the mindset is that, you know, we've been through just about everything. Why not embrace this opportunity that we have? We have a full month extra together that we've literally never had, especially for these seniors on defense. I think the offense has been a little bit more fluid. The defense has been pretty well connected. So I think for them, it's like, hey, we have essentially nothing to lose. We've worked 5-6 years for this. We have so much to be excited for in this experience. I mean, they're doing a football practice walkthrough in Central Park on Christmas morning. So like, you know, I think they've done a good job on finding ways to balance that. Like they know they're there to go win a game, but they're going to allow these seniors and these players to really experience like, hey, this is what it's going to be like from here on out.
That's awesome. So talking about some of the opt-outs and players that you can confirm are playing or are not playing, who on the Cornhuskers team can you give us that we don't expect to see out there?
Yeah. Well, there's a good amount of them that'll not be there on defense just because of transfer portal situations, but a few players that, I mean, there's not a ton because of the fact that this team has not been to a bowl game since 2016, which is, I mean, obviously an unfortunate stat, but it works in Nebraska's favor because no one really wants to miss this opportunity. But Tommy Hill, he was kind of nursing a foot injury at times this season. And he took off about a week after I think the season ended to go back home and start to get ready for the NFL and just try to get back to being healthy. Micah Mazuka on the offensive line, he's been kind of nursing an injury, and so he will not be available. And then Isaiah Newer, he was a wide receiver. He is also been kind of banged up, I guess, and he's going to get ready for the NFL. So those are the only three that we've been told about in the last press conference. The others on defense are transfer portal. So there's some big ones in there like Jamari Butler and James Williams and Kai Wallen, Kai Bear. So those are some big ones. But there's been a lot of discussion about the young guys, and there's been a lot of discussion throughout the season. There were some times where some fans and even some media were like, hey, what about this guy you guys used to talk about? Where's this guy at? And so now in this last month of practices, even some players have brought up young guys' names on their own without being asked about them. So, I mean, the time is now, and they've discussed that this is game one for 2025. So it'll be interesting to see who steps in and how they adjust.
I like that mentality. I think that's perfectly said. If Nebraska is going to go there and win this game, what do they have to do, or what kind of style of football do they have to play to beat a Boston College team?
Well, I think the first word is physical, and that's how this Boston College team plays. I mean, you have Donovan Azaraku, who Coach Rule was like, when I watch film, I look for a player or look for, a side of the football. Like, do we have to game plan specifically for them? And he's like, you watch a few plays and it's like, okay, we have to game plan specifically for this guy, right? So, all team first team All-American. I mean, defensive end player of the year, ACC defense. I mean, he literally has it all. You watch his tape and you're like, okay, I've seen what I need to see in about the first 30 seconds. So that's going to be massive for Nebraska, and especially having a few holes in that defense. The defensive line is going to be okay for the most part. You have Ty Robinson and Nash, and I think some other players that will be able to accept that challenge. And even if they don't accept it, it's going to be, hey, welcome to it, right? Very quickly. So they got to figure out how to adjust to him. That's for sure. And then the running game for Boston College is just monstrous. They have, 4, 5, 6 guys. Essentially, it feels like you got 3 guys over 300 yards. Nebraska does not have that on the ground. So they're going to have to stop the run, which has been Nebraska's strong area on defense, but once again, when you take some of those players out, how do they adjust to that? And I was talking to one of our radio guys, and he said that Nebraska has already had multiple full contact pad practices more than usual when you have a time off like this. So they are very, very focused on how physical this matchup is going to be. And the tackling has been a question mark, which is interesting because last year everyone thought the tackling had definitely increased, and it was, it was one of their strong pieces of the defense. And this year it kind of has been a question mark. So tackling is going to be massively important. And, Nebraska is also out with their defensive line coach and their defensive coordinator. So those have been some shifts as well. And some people have already been moved into those positions. And I'm just curious with this last month, they've talked about how detail oriented the practices have been. I'm curious that will be an obvious observation against this team if it's gotten worse or if it's gotten better in this last month.
To piggyback real quick, is Matt Rule going to call the defensive plays?
I don't think so. I think it'll be Coach Butler just because he also was on the defensive staff this year. And so I think they will turn that over to him. And he knows the defense pretty well. They said a lot of the players went into Coach Rule and they actually were like, hey, we think he deserves this. And Coach Rule was like, I didn't make the hiring solely on that, but I do trust the players that I have coming back. I trust the players that have been here for 4, 5, 6 years and have had multiple guys in this position. And by the way, Tony White's a really good defensive coordinator. Everyone I think knows that now. And for these players to play under him and then say, hey, we actually want the guy that we've already been working under this year to come in versus you bringing in some splashy hire, I think says a lot about just the connection that these players and him have. So there'll be some familiarity there, which I think will be at least a plus.
All right. Well, that concludes it. We appreciate you hopping on with us, Avarie. We will see if the Big Ten continues to roll and the ACC. The ACC has not done very well in bowl games so far. I think they're 0-3. So hopefully for your Nebraska Cornhuskers, that trend continues. Thank you very much for coordinating myself. We appreciate having you on.